Greetings and welcome, everyone. Welcome to this week's Seeking Common Ground virtual town hall. I'm your host. I'm Zakiya Sankara-Jabbar. I'm the National Director of Activism for Brightbeam. In this month, if you've been with us the last 2 Wednesdays, you know we have been hosting Seeking Common Ground conversations around a variety of different important topics as it relates to our education system here in the U.S. And today is no different. Today, we're actually going to be surrounded by a group of experts talking about building mutual accountability between school systems and families. So that means all of you, right? Some of us are connected to the school systems in one way or the other. And all of us are a part of families, and all of us are taxpayers. So we should all be concerned about this particular issue. So we want to welcome each and every one of you to be a part of this conversation with us. Join us in the chat with comments, with questions. We hope towards the end of our 90-minute program today to be able to get to some of your questions, to have our expert panelists respond to those. But in the meantime, if you're here right now, hit the thumbs up button for us. Make sure you share this broadcast around on your social media, and invite others into this conversation. So having said that, I am going to bring up our panelists to introduce themselves to each and every one of you. Again, as I've stated, I'm joined by experts here, and we want to get this conversation rolling. So I am going to bring up our CEO, Chris Stewart. Please, Chris, introduce yourself to our audience and welcome.
Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for everybody who's joining us today. I'm the CEO of Brightbeam. Very proud to be part of this discussion today and watch our team do really great work with bringing people together who have various levels of expertise and various insights from different perspectives and points of view for this very important discussion. I'm also a lifelong activist. I'm going into my 4th decade as a parent. Which is my ultimate, I think, qualification for being involved in these discussions. I have also been a former school board member with the Minneapolis Board of Education, and just a consistent watcher, learner, student of education policy and activism.
Awesome. And thank you so much for being here. I'm going to bring up our next panelist. Christy, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more about who you are? Welcome.
Thank you, Zakiya and Chris. Thank you for hosting these discussions. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Christy Vanets. I am a senior policy fellow for the Foundation for Excellence in Education, and we're a nonprofit based out of Florida that works with states and the federal government to ensure we have good outcomes for K-12 students through state and federal policy. Prior to assuming this position almost 13 years ago, I served as the Assistant Commissioner for the state of Minnesota, and was the Deputy Commissioner in Florida prior to that, where I cut my teeth on education policies in the late 90s and early 2000s. So I'm excited to be here to talk about school accountability. I come from it from a lens of ensuring that we have a very strong state-funded K-12 education system that is not just a public good that benefits everyone, but also a consumer good, which is requiring accountabilities to family and student users. So thank you for joining us today. I look forward to this discussion.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. Next, I am going to bring up Laura Jimenez. Can you introduce yourself to the audience? Welcome.
Thank you so much, Zakiya, and to the entire team for having me. My name is Laura Jimenez, and I'm the Director of Standards and Accountability at the Center for American Progress. So the topic of today's discussion is what I do full-time. I come at this with 20 years of experience in various levels of education at the school level, nonprofit, and at the federal level. Within the Obama administration, I helped to lead a number of the major policy initiatives and work with probably about a third of the states directly. So I'm really familiar with federal and state education policy. And my interest is in designing educational systems that are equitable, well-funded, and are good stewards of public funds in that they serve our children well. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And speaking of our students, I am bringing up our next panelist, Janet Gomez. Welcome, and please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, my name is Janet Gomez. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Chicago. I attend Benito Juarez in the neighborhood of Pilsen. I'm a part of the MICLA Challenge, which is a civic engagement organization. On MICLA, we're trying to make sure that student voice is included in Chicago Public Schools, and we're working to give input in the school quality rating policy, also known as SQRP.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Bright Beam activist, Maurice Cook. Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maurice Cook, founder and executive director of Serve Your City, DC. We're a local DC-based nonprofit organization, and I'm a lead organizer with Ward 6 Mutual Aid. And, you know, that word activist is just, I'm a human that cares deeply for other humans as much as I care about my own well-being. I come to this work, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity to be with Bright Beam, be part of the Bright Beam team. And I come to this work just wanting to make sure, while I'm here with all of you on this beautiful planet, this blessing that we all have, that I give as much as I have for our liberation and for us to move forward in determining our own well-being and liberation.
Yes, absolutely. Welcome again, everybody. And just some more housekeeping for those who are just joining us. Welcome. We welcome your comments and questions in the chat. Take a moment to hit the thumbs up button for us and make sure you share this broadcast, because, again, this is a topic that we should all be concerned about. So we want to welcome an interactive conversation with all of our listeners. And towards the end of this 90-minute program, we hope to be able to get to some of your questions. So please post your questions in the comments as well. Now we can get on with the business of talking about this very important subject. So we have some questions here for our expert panelists. And the first question I want to ask, each of you can answer this one. What do current practices in school accountability look and feel like to students from your perspective? And so I'll kick that one over to Maurice, if you can start us off.
Well, I would say the way it looks to students, and I have to add in parents with that because it is a unit, right? The way it looks for them is constant testing, constant, the evolving of different measuring tools and different assessments constantly, which, I'm a little long in the tooth. It has the assessment industry has gained so much steam over the last 30 to 40 years, and it's an industry into itself. And I feel as if for them, like us adults can expect taxes, these young people can expect testing. And what is it for? Is it demonstrating or creating the outcomes that we're supposedly working on? Is it a true measure on their ability to grow within the environment, within the system? Who is it for? And how does it impact the way that our young people can have real, equitable, true opportunities?
Thank you. I will kick that over to Laura. Your thoughts, same question.
Well, I completed high school before the current practices of accountability were in place. So I can't fully empathize, but I can pull from the research about what we know students need and what they are likely not getting from their education. And the science is clear. It shows that learning is an individual and not always linear process. and that a primary vehicle for learning is relationships between students and their educators, right? Not just teachers, but broadly speaking, their educators. And given the standardized curriculum and pedagogy that we've seen for decades, which we know have vestiges of systemic racism, it's no wonder that we lose so many young people along the way. And it seems to me like it feels like education is being done to them rather than for them.
Thank you. Chris, your thoughts? Same question. Do you need the question again?
No, I mean, I think I get it. With students, just looking at my own students in my own house, I think, they would tell you that it feels like they are being tested a lot and they don't always know the reasons behind the different tests. They don't know the weights behind them, like what's important and what isn't. So when we go in and we look at the parent portal and we see that they have some things missing, or they did good on this thing and not good on this other thing, it's not always clear as parents or even as students which of those things matter and what we should be alarmed by and what we should not be alarmed by. I can put on my school board member hat. When I was a school board member, we went out in Minneapolis to look at the number of tests our kids were getting, because parents and teachers were complaining about the numbers of tests. Now, one of the big light bulb moments for me was then when we came back, we had this long list of tests that were being given to students in classrooms, and the majority of them weren't the accountability tests. I mean, so we need to make a division between like a once annual test that's given so that systems leaders can know whether their system is working well, given once a year, versus that battery of all those other tests that we don't even talk about. We don't name them what they are. And if I started naming some of them, educators might shake their head, but parents would be like, I don't know what that is. Many of those were teacher created tests. So I want us to keep in the conversation here that when we talk about tests, we always say standardized tests, and we think we all know what that means. I don't think we do, because there are 3 million teachers in the United States giving unstandardized tests to our kids all day, every day, weekly, like daily and weekly. And for them, it becomes the primary language in their relationship with the student. The primary way that they're having an exchange with their student is, I'm going to tell you some things, and then on Friday, we're going to have a test, right? That's not the same thing as standardized accountability tests. So we should make sure that parents and the public know the difference.
I appreciate that. Let's get our students' perspective. Janet, same question. What does accountability mean to you as a student? And what does it look and feel like?
I just feel like accountability in students right now is just kind of detached from reality. When thinking about this question, I kind of just like ignore the whole idea that I am anxious and I do stress over it, because it's kind of just like I'm desensitized to all of it. So I just kind of like, it's just a part of my life at this point. And I just feel like it's that relationship where students are stressed about it and they just kind of make it part of their reality. My school in specific, we're a benchmark school where students, they take the test. It's a standardized test, but then afterwards, the teacher gives us like a reflection form, and it tells us like, what do you think that you did good in, and what do you think you didn't? And based on that, they kind of like even out our grade, and like they use our input in the test. So I just feel like that's something good that is developing, but I know that's not the situation for every student.
Wow, thank you. Christy, definitely want to bring you in on this as well.
Thank you. So I think Maurice kicked it off with like the right sentiment, that it just feels like all we're doing is testing all the time. That's all kids are looking at and feeling, and parents say, oh, test after test after test. And I think the direction Chris is headed is the one I really like too, is we want that end of the year summative assessment as a check on the system of what happens. And I think there is a lot of confusion about what is a state level accountability assessment of learning. So did students learn the standards? And those instructional assessments for learning, what do teachers need to know and gather information on a day-to-day basis in order to provide instruction? And I really believe those end of the year summative assessments are really important to make sure that our schools are doing right by students and students are mastering the standards. And the advance of those 20 years ago with No Child Left Behind were a way to do that and look at outcomes rather than just all the inputs that go into education to ensure we're getting the outcomes that we expect based on all of those inputs. So we really, stay the course on accountability and standards, but making sure that people understand what the difference are between assessments of learning and assessments for learning. And those assessments of learning are the ones that are important to make sure that everybody's actually gotten where they needed to be by the end of the year.
Thank you all. And again, just reminding our audience, if you're just joining us today, we're talking about building mutual accountability between school systems and families. So next question, we'll do it popcorn style again. What should schools be held accountable for? What's the fairest way to do that? I feel like everybody will have thoughts on this. Why don't I bring you up first, Christy? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that question.
Sure. This might be the most challenging question that you posed today. So I do think that as I mentioned in my beginning and opening, that education is a public good designed to benefit everybody, which really demands a federal and state level of accountability. And it's also a consumer good, which requires a lot of different accountability features and factors for students and families as the user. And we also have multiple audiences for an accountability system. So designing an accountability system with so many different stakeholders really presents a lot of different trade-offs. Parents might want more information on what are offerings and opportunities. Policymakers need more information about what's working and what isn't with respect to student outcomes to be able to drive and direct resources. So from the state and federal perspective, having policymakers have that information on how to design better policies, how to better direct resources, we really need to understand outcomes of students. We need to know if students can read, write, and compute, and whether or not they're making progress over the prior years. There's a reason states have set state standards and expectation, and it's to determine whether or not students have mastered those standards. So from the state and federal policy perspective, I'm really coming at this from the academic side of it. Schools are supposed to do a whole bunch of things for all of our students, but to measure just whether or not minimally students have met or mastered the standards, I think is imperative for that big A accountability or those transparent ratings to make sure all students are benefiting.
Thank you. Same question. I want to bring in Maurice on this. This question is two-part. What should schools be held accountable for, and what's the fairest way to do that?
Well, I'll start with the second part of the question, Zakia. I think it is unfair that we rate or rank schools as if they're a homogenous large entity. These schools are not the same, and the clients or the constituency within the schools are not the same. And I'm thinking, hyper local, and both our DC traditional public school and our charter school systems. I mean, the fact that you can have well-to-do, wealthy constituencies on one side of town be ranked and rated using the same assessment with schools that, struggle to ensure that their children are eating, to ensure that their children are sleeping, to ensure that their children are alive based upon, where they happen to live. I just think that's crazy. And the kind of, hammer approach of, one size fits all ranking and rating systems that we have within DC is ridiculous. And, the schools that I work in and try my best to support that, that we provide many resources and opportunities for as an organization, I measure them myself of being able to bring more families within the building. It's a challenge that the well-to-do schools don't have because you have parents with the capacity to get absolutely engaged with every facet and every process within the school buildings. Where the schools where I work, because of structural racism, poverty, and classism, and the neglect that happens outside of the school building, it's so challenging to bring those families in. And so the fact that we rank these schools using the same rating system is ridiculous.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Any thoughts on how we can make that more equitable for you? Like, what should the schools be held accountable for, given the conditions that you just described?
Yes, I mean, I feel we have to be more pragmatic about the challenges that face different students, different families, different schools, and what these schools are called to do. And I saw someone ask the question about different standards for different youth or different students, and I think it's a mixed bag. I just believe I've seen the outcome of utilizing this broad stroke approach and the damage and harm it causes in really creating an individualized measure on what success looks like. And being on one end of that spectrum, or the other, I don't think it's helped any of us. I think it is very nuanced and very stratified. And if we had the answers, then we wouldn't be faced with all of these challenges. And I can't claim that I have the answers.
Sure.
But I do know that a student that comes to school hungry, hasn't slept, cannot be measured with a student that doesn't face these same problems. And if the pandemic didn't teach us that, I don't know what will. Yeah.
Good point. Chris, I'm dying to know your thoughts. Same question.
Well, don't die for them. I'll give them to you for free. I want to maybe challenge a little bit of something that Christy said about education. To me, just technically speaking, is not a public good. A public good, by definition, by technical terms of our definition, is something where it's not rivalrous, meaning we all have equal access to the same thing. Our public parks doesn't require anything for admittance for me to get the access to the same park. You get the park you get access to. Public libraries that don't require you to have like an address or a residence, or that are open to all, are closer to a public good. Public schools are the opposite of a public good. Public schools are a rivalrous, meaning what I takes away from you sometimes. So, for instance, in the United States, predominantly white school districts get $23 billion more per year than districts that are not predominantly white. That is based upon a gerrymandering of school district boundaries that create artificial populations of people that redline some students into educational deserts and redline others into islands of privilege. Wow. And that in itself means that we're not talking about a system where everybody has equal access to the same things. Because last time I checked, money matters. And if you're getting $23 billion more than I'm getting, that means that we're not actually in the same system. It's a myth that we have one system, that we're in one system. That said, though, to Maurice's point, if we took wealthy people or white people or people with two-parent incomes, any way you want to slice and dice it, and you look just at a population of kids, let's just say for Black or brown students that are in poverty, and you look just at them and you don't look at anybody else across all schools, across all districts, and across all states, it's not universal failure. Some of them are doing much better than the other ones in the same class of students, in the same students facing the same circumstances. So in my mind, what you want to make sure that you do when you're creating accountability for schools is, number one, that you're benchmarking against what the best students are doing within their groups, and ask some serious questions about why are they making progress? Why are they making year-over-year progress in this school or city or district and not in this other one? So that you can have some common sense measures around holding people accountable, number one, for forward progress, for acquisition of proficiency and numeracy. These are things, I don't care what your situation is, these are things where there still is a range of possibilities for those kids, and we can't have low expectations inform the way that we hold schools accountable. They should be making forward progress. We spend $700 billion a year into the educational system. That should come with some strings attached, meaning there should be forward progress with whatever students. Parents are sending us the best that they have every day in their students. Many of those students are walking into schools where they are perfectly capable of doing a lot more than adults are asking them to do. And they are victims of low expectations, lack of clarity around standards, incoherent educational practices, none of which have anything to do with their home life. Those are all systemic things and systemic barriers. So if I wanted an accounting for what you do in schools, I would want to hold them account for improvements in proficiency, forward movement and forward progress year over year with the same kids, and some milestones. Are you acquiring reading? Because we know that poor kids that have a tough time learning to read still can learn to read in 3rd grade or 4th grade. Are you doing Algebra 1 in 8th grade? Are you going into high school prepared for a college or career preparatory lessons? And are you graduating from high school capable of doing something that leads you to the next step in the world? These for me would be things that I would want to see. I would want the numbers. I want to know. I want you to disaggregate the numbers, and I want you to tell me how many of each group of kids are making that happen. My bottom line for this is our educational system should work equally well for everyone. Doesn't mean that everybody is ending up in the same place, but it should work equally well for them, meaning they should all be making forward progress, and there should be some proof that it's happening.
Well, you sure I got a lot of amens and mic drops and all that good stuff in the comments. So people are definitely resonating with what you had to say, Chris. So thank you. I want to bring our student up again and just get your thoughts. Janet, what should schools be held accountable for? You're in school, right? Like, you've been in school the last 12 years. And so from your perspective and your experience, what's the fairest way to do that?
I was just listening to like everyone's comments on it and how like they're talking about funding and how like kids that are predominantly white get that money more than, minority schools. Growing up in like a diverse city, like you do see that difference. When applying to high schools, there's a certain way to like get into those schools. Chicago, like really like ideal to get into selective enrollment school, and to get into selective enrollment school, you need to have like really good grades. Your NWA scores have to be like really high. And it's also determined by your rank. So like if you live like in a neighborhood that is like rank 3, for example, your test scores have to be higher. So the rank is 1 through 4. So if it's like 1, like you're expected to get lower scores. So, you have less to do to get into that school. And a lot of it is based off numbers. So personally, I was accepted into selective enrollment school. But I didn't like the atmosphere of it. The resources were there, the people were there, but it really just wasn't clicking for me. And it's, my experience might not be the same as everyone else's, but I did transfer out from that school, and now I go to a school that isn't selective enrollment. But I do see that difference. Like, I see how different the environment is, and when something is needed, it happens. Here at Juarez, a minority-based high school, we kind of have to like really fight and use our voices, and that's something that other schools don't do. And I just feel like funding and distribution should not be based on supporting those who already have those resources, instead of, recognizing those that need it and just not ignoring it, because, these success stories won't happen if you just support those who already have it. And I just feel like, the district should like be held more accountable into what they're doing with that money, and if it's actually being used for that greater good.
Thank you, Janet. I want to kind of drill in a little bit on something that you said, because it came, the people in the comments too, it resonated with them as well. You mentioned that you didn't like the environment of the selective school, the school that everybody, you know, kind of wanted to get into. Do you mind, or do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit more about that part of it? What about the school did not resonate with you that you actually was like, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go, you know, to a school where I feel comfortable and welcome?
Yeah, well, again, it's just like, it feels like a competition, because that's what it is. You're competing against your colleagues to get, now at first it's to get to the best high school, to the best college. It's just a constant competition. Like at the back of your head, you just know, you know, like you need to fight for, you know, your spot. And it just kind of feels like, you know, there was like, in a way, like segregation, like the white kids would be with the white kids, the Mexicans would be with the Mexicans. And it was just like, I remember like someone like saw me like, oh my God, you're Mexican. And I'm like, yeah. Like, it's just, I've never like been in that environment where like my race was something that was interesting or like a topic. And it was just something that, you know, you had to be with who you looked like. And I didn't like that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really sorry you had to experience that, but I hope your experience at the school that you are at now has been better. Laura, we want to bring you up as well. Same question. Interested in your thoughts, sort of, you know, what should schools be held accountable for, and what's the fairest way to get there?
Well, firstly, I'll say to Janet, Orale Mexicana. But to answer the question, I think we need an understanding of the different roles that the federal government play, states play, districts play, and schools play in education, because it's not the same. And with that said, what it results in is that not everything that happens in schools is within their control. So what do I mean by that? Well, states, they set funding levels within their states, within their general fund, of how much they're going to give to education. They set policies on curriculum. They will either decide what the curriculum is or say, this is a local matter. They set policies for the certification and effectiveness of teachers, and sometimes even a rating system. They create state accountability systems as required by federal law. They set state high school graduation requirements. Then looking at districts, they usually select the type of curriculum, meaning the quality. They provide professional development, so they choose it and hence control the quality. And then, you know, at the local county level, they add local funding for their school districts, and we've kind of touched on that. And that's really where a lot of the inequities lie, is at that more local level. But then you have school boards making decisions about how district budgets are spent and what school schedules are. They can also create, you know, sort of honors and college prep course pathways that continue to track students to this day. You know, and then schools, well, to an extent, they kind of control the climate and the relationships within the building. And I say to an extent because if the school infrastructure, meaning the quality of the actual building and the water, if that's not addressed, that's usually a district issue. And if that is completely in disrepair, well, that's not really in schools' control for the most part. So I think an accountability system in the future needs to hold each level of the system accountable for the role that they play, and getting very honest about the role that each level plays.
You mentioned tracking, Laura. I know that has been a hotly debated topic for decades now. And I guess I wanted to see if you could drill down a little bit more on that. You know, from your perspective, is tracking or does tracking even make sense in the 21st century, the way that it's traditionally been done?
No. Very simply put.
I love the clarity.
Well, you know, tracking, it began 100 years ago, right? When immigrants were coming into the country, and it was a way to differentiate what kind of resources and education people got. And it's evolved over time because there's a number of studies that I've written about that show tracking is very harmful to students, but it now just exists under a different name. You have advanced placement and international baccalaureate, you have honors, you have college prep, and then you have traditional courses. It's still tracking, it's separating students into different qualities of course pathways. And I think it was the 2018 results from the PISA assessment, the Program for International Student Assessment. Lots of different countries, the OECD countries, participate in it, and they theorize that the results from America are really from tracking, because they are showing incredible variance of scores within a school district, which is showing you that when you separate kids, they end up learning very, very different things. And I saw a comment from someone in the audience about different standards for different kids. We should hold all kids to the same high standard, but we have to provide each child equitably what they need to reach those standards. And they're going to do it in their own timeline, not in the timeline that educators set.
I love that. Thank you. Put very, very succinctly.
Sure did.
Yeah, definitely. Next question. And
actually, you know what, Zakia, can I just add just a quick
absolutely.
link of that?
Yeah, please.
I just want to add just quickly, tracking is one of those discussions that requires a deep kind of dive, like for America. And like so many of the issues we're going to talk about today, there's just such widespread ignorance about what things actually are. Like when the education establishment talks about these things, we don't always get it as parents of what they mean, but some of these things show up in our schools. And for me, the only reason I'm raising this is there is a way to make sure that kids are in cohorts where they're getting what they need, like because of special education, because of some special needs that there might be, for other reasons that is not tracking, that gets, and gifted and talented. Sometimes kids have different interests, so they get put into special populations, whatever. So again, we would have to have a nuanced conversation about what tracking is and what it isn't. To the extent that it's a sorting mechanism of schools to put some kids on track for welfare in prison and other kids on track for Harvard, that's bad. Let's just call that what it is, right? To the extent where it's like a sorting mechanism trying to get every kid to a seat that's that intrinsically motivates them, and that it's something that they want to do or whatnot, so you don't have one size fits all education. To me, that feels a little bit different, and we want to make sure that when we talk about tracking, we're not supporting the former. We're not supporting the other thing, but we are supporting kids getting to maybe special magnet programs that they want to be in, or more project-based learning if that's what they want, versus some other way of educating or whatnot. So I just wanted to raise that flag. Again, the education establishment does not do a good job of informing the public of what these things look like, what they mean, and some of the deeper issues beneath them.
I'm so glad that you did that, because now, it's getting my wheels are turning, and I'm thinking about my own children's school district, MCPS here, in Montgomery County, Maryland's largest school district. And the whole gifted education and access is something that is very hotly contested here in this county, and tons of lawsuits around access, particularly for Black children, has been at issue. One of the reasons why is because in many school districts, the kids who are selected for that, a lot of times it's the teacher recommendation that carries the most weight. And if you have educators who are making decisions who have some underlying bias, that creates a problem. And I was thinking about Lane Wright, what his comment said, that, his daughter is in second grade, she's been identified for gifted and talented classes, but his son has not. That's kind of been my experience too. Even though my son is much older than my daughter, his experience going through school is like night and day between, his early years and what he had access to, versus now my daughter, who was in second grade, is like quickly becoming the teacher's pet. But anyway, like it's about like almost, like whether the educator really connects to the child has a lot to do with whether young people get access to certain programs. So I really appreciate you pulling us back in to kind of delve in a little bit deeper on that. That's a very, very important point. Next question, Janet, I'm going to start with you because this question says, if we really centered student learning, how would accountability look different at the school, district, and state levels? And then how would we hold the adults involved at each level accountable for building equitable, student-friendly learning conditions in classrooms and schools? That's for you, Janet.
Right. I think the atmosphere would totally be different.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, students feel more comfortable in their atmosphere and, with their teachers. I just feel like a lot of it right now is just people being silenced because we do feel, sometimes, especially in my community-based high school, our voices aren't heard as much as we want it to be. Like our student voice committee, they constantly fight for things to happen in our school, but it isn't happening. It's just, adults. My principal's name's Okon. Like, we always hear him trying to help and trying to listen to the students, but it never really goes anywhere. They usually the answer that we get back is, you need to do better in academics so you can get that recognition. And it's just something that really bothers not just me, but, minorities and people in this school, because, like, that shouldn't determine, common resources in high schools given. I just feel like, adults need to start realizing that their actions, influence everyone else around them. And, it's a cycle, and this educational system influence everyone based on that top level.
Thank you. And we appreciate that, Tanisha. Definitely going to ask the students with a question centered on student learning. Christy, I want to bring you in. We haven't heard from you in a while. I want to get your thoughts. Same question.
Sure. I think at the school and the district level, it should look probably pretty different. Doing everything we can to meet students where they are, to personalize that learning, and to give them a good opportunity to learn at their own pace, their own path, and their own way. I think, though, at the state level, the best thing we can do is provide the opportunity for choice. So students have the ability to select the school that really focuses on their needs and their interests and where they feel the most comfortable. So making sure we have students in the right place, so open enrollment with transportation and having educational savings accounts and opportunity for students to access the education that works best for them. At the state level, I still think we need to maintain the same standards and expectations for students, but how schools and districts get us there are going to look different than how it has in the past. Right now, we're not working with each individualized student. The personalized learning movement and the differentiation of instruction hasn't fully happened. So making sure we have teachers that are able to differentiate better within classrooms and to really identify the needs that those students have, and making sure they're fully trained and equipped to teach science of reading as well as math and other topics and subjects as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Maurice, thoughts? How do we make sure that student learning is the center in accountability?
Well, we have to, us adults, we have to kind of get on our knees and place our young people on our back so that they can lead us and guide us for this goal to be successful. I mean, they have no real political power in determining what their educational experience will really look like. There's nothing in the system that, grants them the same authority as, school superintendents or chancellors of educational systems. I mean, it's a power issue. It's a power dynamic. You think about in the last 20 years, we've been able to create this individualized social media experience. And really the social media experience is based on the limit of the platforms available. And that is true. But it is an individualized experience where our school system is more like a food court, where there's predetermined options based upon the restaurants or the vendors within the food court. And nowhere do we have the opportunity to be our own chefs, mixing and matching, crafted and designed by the students themselves, based upon, their family and what their parents' wishes and the students' natural instinctive interests in the world. And so as a vision, this could only be guided by ensuring that students have just as much power as the politically appointed overseers of the system.
Ooh-wee, that was heavy. You're right, bringing in the question of power and creating some tension there and raising some contradictions. I really appreciate that. I might as well just bring Chris in now since he's over there, amen, and popping his fingers. Go ahead.
I was just listen. I think Maurice just said a lot. I think he just said several miles of a lot. I think that this question is so hard to answer, but a lot of it, the answer that I would give is in Maurice's answer that he just gave. I love the food court analogy, but let me just tell a story that maybe helps explain where I would say I don't have a God view that can say how we should do this thing, because there are very smart people working on accountability systems across the country. They argue with each other. They don't all agree with how it should look or what it should, how it should perform. And that has been the constant in a lot of our education kind of leadership for years, for decades. How should we create these systems so that they're fair and they're equitable, but also so that they tell us what we need to know, all that. But visiting Seattle a few years ago, I met with students at a school who all told me that they felt like they were kind of the misfits of the Seattle system. And they had all left the Seattle system to go to this one specific school that I visited. I was interested in it because it was a very personalized school. The education there really was great for kids that had felt like the one best system had left them behind. And they described to me a very brutal system of tracking in Seattle, which really kind of threw me for a loop, because Seattle is a very progressive city. But as early as middle school, kids themselves and their parents know what track they're going to be on and whether they're going to get the good education in the later grades of the school system. And some of them start making decisions when they know that the tracking is going to put them on the wrong track. And it starts in middle school and goes all the way through high school. The school that I met them at was their refuge. It was the place where they went after they knew that was taking place. And one of the students there, they had a platform that they were using at the school. She showed me her version of the platform. She showed me kind of like just this dashboard, and it was all of her educational pathways that she was on, all the assignments and the things that she was doing. But at the end, there were predetermined goals that her mom, and the school's teachers and educators had collaborated on to create the goals. And then they backtracked from there, and she knew exactly where she was in the process of getting there. And it was all there in her display under her own control. She could type it up and pull it up. Now, my first thought as a parent was like, so that means that you can do it, but your parents also can pull it up and see where you guys are on the spectrum of meeting your self-determined goals at the localist level possible, the student, parent, and educator level. Now, that to me seems like bottom-up accountability, because now that you have in that school, all their students are being educated that way. At any given time, you can pull all of their students' data to see where they are on the path to the goals that they set out for themselves, educational goals, whether those goals are, to make it into business school or college or trade school or whatever it is that they determined. you'd be able to figure it out. But it's not because of some top-down scenario that made that happen. And maybe the reason that we keep goofing up accountability systems is that very smart people at the top, when they get together, they're not very smart people. Over time, they just argue for many years, and we're not thinking of bottom-up accountability. Now, the most local level that I saw it as a layperson, not as a person who's a scholar and studies this stuff, was in that school, was watching a student who, not just one student, but multiple students who had felt left behind by the previous system go into a school where it was all under their control. The goals, the outcomes, the progress, the system for monitoring and tracking was all in, just a couple of keystrokes away for each of them. And they owned it. It was their accountability, not just for the system or the school or their educators, but for themselves altogether. I thought that was a fairly elegant and beautiful example of what could be. Unfortunately, it's not the norm.
Wow. What's the name of the school? That's amazing.
See, I don't know if I want to do that now, because some of y'all haters out there, some of y'all hate on people for doing good things. If people want to contact me privately, I will tell them. And it's not just one school. There are multiple different schools that are taking this model and adopting it across the country. But yes.
I get it. Yeah, no, I'll definitely message you offline, because that sounds like an amazing school. Laura, please, I would love to hear your thoughts. Same question. Do I need to repeat the question for you?
No, I've got it here. So I am one of those people who wrestles with this question every single day. And I think the overarching question that I keep coming up with is accountable to whom for what? We need to answer that question. How are schools accountable to their communities, to their students, to their teachers, to districts? There's lots of different relationships involved. And I think ultimately the what is, for me, in my mind, students that meet the fullness of their potential. So how do we build a system then that is able to achieve that? We know that it requires equitable distribution of resources within the district. It requires rich and inclusive curricula. It requires teachers that are trained in inclusivity and trauma-informed teaching, teachers that are masters of the subjects that they teach. Elementary, and we know elementary teachers are certified in lots of different subjects. When students are learning most how to read and how to learn, and should we have a system like that? It's a question in my mind. We also want to engage students who also get to determine what they learn based on their interests. And if we really centered student learning, like, it's just, I think accountability would look a lot differently than it currently does.
Absolutely. And our student leader here started us off, letting us know that certainly the students, unfortunately, because of adult decisions, are oftentimes not the center of who's creating these accountability measures. So that's definitely some work that still needs to be done. So I'm going to bring up another question here, and we're kind of hit on it some, but I want us to kind of go deeper into this question. And it says, what problems do communities see with district transparency and accountability? And Laura, I'll actually start with you. What problems do communities see with district transparency and accountability?
Yeah, so we underwent a series of community conversations in a few cities across the country to ask them this very question. And what we heard pretty consistently is that parents and school communities, they want more real-time data on the things that they care about, which include student social and emotional well-being, their progress to goals. They want to know about the offerings and the richness that's available within the schools and whether their students truly have access. They want to feel welcomed on the school building. I heard a lot that parents and families don't feel welcomed within the school building. So I think we've got to solve the problem of what is the right high quality data that we need to provide to parents and families so that they can support children's learning when they're not at school. Because I think that's the other thing that our education has really missed the boat on, is assuming that student learning only occurs when they're within a classroom or within a school building, when we know that they're learning all of the time, especially in those early years. So what kind of information can we get to parents and families that will best support that learning that we know is going on throughout the day?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. As a parent myself, I went through that feeling of being unwelcomed in the school building, and it's not just racialized, but because in some schools we know there's like predominant African American and other student of color populations, and even sometimes in those schools, there's still the unwelcoming feeling by even leaders of color. So it's also a pretty class-based issue, which we don't talk about enough, I think, in this space. And I see Maurice is vibing with that. What are your thoughts here, Maurice, on that same question? What are the problems with communities seeing district accountability and transparency?
Well, here in DC, it's tough because $900 million budget. And we need to understand from the system itself, the traditional public school system, who makes the decision to ensure that the money flows to the most well-resourced schools. What is the process to determine where federal dollars and local dollars are spent? And obviously, it's not an equitable system. And who is responsible and accountable for maintaining the status quo of the schools that need the most resources somehow are neglected the most, and the money flows towards the most resourced schools. And then also the dynamic between the charter school system that we have, which it basically educates half of our students, and the rules and regulations and laws around data transparency and outcome transparency and accountability within the charter school system. They do not have the same rules and regulations for them to be forthcoming with sharing their outcomes. And all of these things are extremely challenging in what I always call our two-tiered Jim Crow still educational system within Washington, D.C.
Wow, that's heavy. And so in terms of that tiered system, right, that you talked about, and I guess accurately described as a Jim Crow system still in 2021, where you still have within the public school system having the dollars of the school district go to already well-resourced schools. How can the communities and the families in the schools that are not well-resourced, how can they ensure that there's resource equity across the district? What's the work with that, Maurice?
Well, listen, we have folks doing it in different ways. You know me, I work outside of that monster. I'm outside of the house, and I try to do my best to inspire just us human beings to provide the love that we've all received and come up with our own solutions to make up the gap. Other folks, they testify, they do letter campaigns, they go to the council members' homes and protest, and they rally, and they call-ins and the petitions, and God bless them for doing that. And I can't say that that's not, part of what it would take for things to change. But our time is precious. And unfortunately, we have so many people who are not directly impacted by any of these issues that are the decision makers and the policy makers, and think of this as their issue area. That's not my approach. It's very clear just by my upbringing on what it actually takes to value everyone within the village.
Right.
And we have to do for ourselves, clearly.
Yeah. That was sobering, but I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's historically consistent. When I think about the history of education, particularly of Black people in this country, we have um, historically taken it upon ourselves to sacrifice, even when it was illegal to read, to still sacrifice our lives to learn how to read and to have access to an education. So you are still in that tradition, Brother Maurice, and we appreciate that. Same question, right? I want to make, oh, did we lose our student? Looks like we should, hopefully should. Oh, there we go. So Janet, thanks for joining back with us. Wanted to bring that question to you. What problems do communities see when it comes to district transparency and accountability? From your perspective, what are your thoughts on that?
I just feel like the community and the district lose trust in each other because, you do see, like, specifically in Chicago, you see these selective enrollments getting all the resources, all the acknowledgement, and it just drives those other schools that aren't selective, like, it gets them really annoyed. You see that money being given to those schools and they don't need it. It's like supporting schools that already have all those resources. And communities, I feel like they like take it really personal, as they should, because it shows like the preference. It shows like who they have their preference on and who they think is going to succeed. It's not something that's very equitable. You see how the district is choosing who they want to succeed, and they don't prioritize those that need those resources.
Thank you. Christy, same question. What problems do communities see with district transparency and accountability? Same question.
Sure. I think one of the concerns is, I don't think districts are always transparent, and the information that we can find in the public domain or on a district website is really that easy to find all the time, even if there's a state or federal law that requires it. And it's not easy to access, and there's not always comparison information. So the transparency, I think, is good, but a little bit of a misnomer because I don't think it's always accessible. And then from the accountability perspective, it's the people providing the information are accountable for it. So it makes it very difficult to have a good, honest, transparent system when the people providing it are also the ones accountable for making sure ensuring those outcomes. So it's making sure we also have systems that are external checks and not just those that are providing transparency at the school or district level, but those that are providing external transparency and accountability for what's happening in the school building as well.
Thank you. I wanted to remind the audience, if there's questions that you all have, please post them in the comments. We'll try to definitely make some time to get to those for you. And thank you all for still being in here with us. Let's hop to the next question, unless there's anything else people are want to add here. Anybody else want to add anything to that one?
Well, I wanted to be accountable to our young person, Janet. And I wanted to tell you, little soldier, you're not on your own. And, I'll make sure that we get connected, and you can ask me for anything. And don't be afraid, because you're not by yourself. That's right. And we're here for you. We uplift you, and I'm in your corner. And that's a bad thing that I'm in your corner. So I don't want you to have to struggle for nothing. All right, sister. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, because you're living through it in real time.
Right.
And us adults, we've I won't say we've failed you, but we have to fight harder to uplift you and to support you. And you are the focus. And God bless you.
Yeah, that's real. Thank you, Maurice, for sure. Here's a question that I want to ask, and it definitely gets to me, and I definitely want to hear from everybody on this one. It says, how can schools hold parents, students, communities accountable in ways that are fair and not based in racist stereotypes? Yeah, that's a definitely that's a loaded question. But Maurice, why don't we start with you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
I don't know who said it. I can't remember who said it. Some very brilliant Black ancestor. But I would love a world where however people think of us, it wouldn't matter, because we would have the power to do what it is that we need to do. And that's my feeling on it. People are going to believe, we're all conditioned to believe things about us and how our behavior and our innate nature has determined our outcomes. But there's a truth, and we need to embrace and hold on to that truth, no matter what anyone else feels. So those are my thoughts on that.
I appreciate that. Laura, wanted to bring you up. Same question. Or let me make sure you heard the question. It was, how can schools hold parents, students, and communities accountable in ways that are fair and not based in racist stereotypes?
How can schools hold those individuals accountable? That's a great question. I don't know that we've really figured that out. I keep coming back to accountable to whom for what, so what would schools be holding these entities accountable for, especially when we know that within the community there are enormous inequities: access to transportation, access to good, healthy food, access to clean air. All of these things impact students' presence at school and their abilities to even be able to absorb the materials. So I do think that while schools cannot solve everything, and we've put, I think, an unfair burden on schools of what it is they can solve, I do think they need to be part of the solution. But I also think we as a society need to think through, how are we including schools within their broader communities. I think the approach is a little too siloed, and we need to think about, how do all of the resources, the public resources that we have available, how should all of those things contribute to students and their well-being? So does the city or the county's transportation system agency play a role? I say it does. What about the health system? I say it does. So I think we need to be taking a much more communal approach to student well-being. And there are some models that are trying to get there, but they're very early. One example is children's cabinets. There are a number of them at the state level and at the local level that are kind of trying to take a more intersected governmental approach. But I do think that before, schools can really hold any other entities accountable, there has to be a reckoning with the resources that are available.
Yeah, I feel like this question, for me, what comes up is sort of this current debate that we've all been inundated with for months around critical race theory, which technically actually doesn't exist in K through 12, is not being taught. But what's getting caught up in that, Laura and all the other panelists, is like teaching actual American history and the truth around actual American history. And so there's some consequences, real legal consequences for schools in Tennessee and Texas and some other states who actually passed legislation because parents, right, are showing up at school board meetings saying, we don't want certain things, being taught to our kids. So when that's what comes up for me, sort of like when I hear that question. But you're right, in terms of schools exist within a larger, community, and certainly there has to be a fuller type of approach to it. But having said that, Christy, I wanted to bring you in to see if you had thoughts about that same question as well.
Sure. Well, to start with, we need to make sure that we have an effective educator in every one of our classrooms and provide the resource and instruction that kids need to have their individualized, personalized curriculum in order to reach their goals and their potential. And if we can't do that, we need to be providing choice with transportation so they can find a place where they can get the education that best suits their needs. But most of all, we need to make sure that we maintain rigorous expectations for all students. We know all kids can learn, and we need to change those cultural expectations in our classroom as well to make sure that all kids can reach their potential.
Thank you. Chris?
I feel like this is a very tough question because nobody's going to like my answer.
Uh-oh.
And nobody's going to like the way that I see this particular issue, though. We are failing our children. And by we, I mean, it's not one group. It's not schools or educators or people within the system. Our kids live within the context of communities and families and systems and cities. And the priorities of raising well and healthy children are lost on the majority of the adults that are most responsible for it. We do not hold our elected officials accountable for child outcomes in their jurisdictions. We don't hold community members or parents or anyone accountable. So a lot of this conversation, we're talking about how we hold schools accountable and educators, and I'm here for that discussion. But if I'm thinking about justice for children would be all the adults that are implicated in their healthy development beyond the hook in some sort of formal, fair way for the outcomes of those children. And one question for everybody is, I don't care where you exist within the life of children, are you doing everything you possibly could be doing for their wellness and for their health? And as much as we can talk about educators and schools and everybody else, the answer to that question is no for many of the adults that live within the universe of where our children are. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have. It's going to stroke everybody's equity nerve, and there's going to be lots of hand wringing and kind of unfortunately sidestepping of the question. But in my perfect world, communities and churches and clergy and parents and community members, politicians, leaders, school districts would all be of one accord in that we all have to be accountable. We have to be accountable whether our kids are being fed, whether they are getting to bed and getting to sleep on time, whether they're getting up in the morning on time, whether they're getting their homework done and going to school on time, whether we are making it so that they have safe passage to get there, and that when they do get there, that they have the books that they need and the resources. This is all like a constellation of adults that need to make that happen, from parents to community leaders, churches, politicians, mayors, and all of those people are off the hook. I could go to any city in the country and we can talk a lot about the accountability of the school system, but the mayors in many of their cities feel no kind of accountability for the outcomes of the kids in their cities, even as they're giving great speeches about how their cities are world-class, how they have world-class cities and how they brought business back and how they have so much development and everything around them. Man, listen, we are all accountable for the kids, but we are looking for technical ways to hold the schools accountable without any type of mechanism for making sure that schools have adequate partners in communities and in the public, helping them with the tough job of making sure all our kids get what they need.
Hey, Chris, can I please say, stop picking on our mayor in Washington, D.C. Please stop picking on that lady. You talking directly to her, man. Leave us alone.
I will say this much: that could be a lot of mayors. Some of the mayors of some of the biggest cities with all the condos and all the wealth in the world going up feel absolutely zero kind of responsibility when you bring them stats on how children are existing in their city, right? And, I heard Laura say, child cabinets, which is something I'm a big fan of.
Yeah.
Like, states having is your workforce development and health and human services and education groups and everybody else, everybody who touches the life of a child, do they have a single kind of way of talking about what they're going to do to make sure that every kid, for instance, in Kentucky, every kid in Seattle, every kid anywhere is going to get what they need to be healthy and thriving and strong? My answer to that is no. And they're all pointing fingers at the others. A mayor will tell you, Chris, I don't handle the schools.
Right.
That's
They
the
love
school
to say
people.
that, yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, oh yeah. But see, there's a lot of stuff that happens outside of school in your city that creates a healthy child.
Recreation centers,
right?
Yep.
Recreation centers, zoos,
Yep.
museums. A city is a school in itself.
Mhm.
And in some cases, it's the primary school for a lot of kids. But yet the mayor of that city doesn't feel any heat about doing well. I do want to say, though, the most touchy part of this, though, is going to be the parents. And not everybody can have that discussion. You can't have outsiders telling parents what they should and shouldn't be doing, but you can have insiders. This should be a community discussion we should be having about our collective communal responsibility for our children.
Yeah. Janet, what are your thoughts? Same question.
Growing up in an atmosphere where you're told the only way to make it is to making it out of the hood, and I feel like my success story could be different from yours. Just because I stay somewhere doesn't mean that I am not successful. Putting those ideas and putting those perspectives in children really affect what their community is and what it represents to them. I just feel like, overall, people just need to start having an open mind and really stop pointing fingers on who's doing what wrong, and really just sit back and think, what are you doing to better the educational system? Because at the end of the day, we're not going to go anywhere back and forth, you need to do this, you need to do that, when no one's doing anything to better the situation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for bringing that into the space. And as always, we appreciate you being here and sharing and being totally honest and open to the answers to these questions. Now is the time we're actually going to turn to some questions that we have been receiving throughout this time together. We have about 12, 13 minutes left in today's program. So we want to bring in some comments or some questions from the comment section here. And one of them came in a little earlier. I believe it was from Tanisha. And so her question is, are we going to talk about the relationship between teachers' unions and, I believe, the lack of accountability in schools? So I'll throw that one to you, Chris, and see what your thoughts are on that question from the audience.
Restate the question too.
So she wanted to know if we were going to talk about teachers' unions and their role, I believe is how she framed it, in the lack of accountability in our schools, in some of our schools.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit broader than that. I will talk about it because you know that I have no problem with talking about it. But, there was earlier in this discussion, there was some discussion around transparency between districts and the community. And as a former school board member, what I want to tell you very clearly is that you know what they want you to know. In terms of transparency or whatnot, what we need, we need way more information, period, about what's the state of our children. We need a data liberation movement is what we need. And we need that data to be held in community trust outside of the institutions like the school boards and the unions and everybody else who has that data. We need each city, Minneapolis, Seattle, wherever you live, Louisville, they need a centralized data trust that parents can access, that community members, activists can have a fair shot at it. Our communities are studied by every university in their state. Our zip codes are studied. We are the most studied people and the least taught people on planet Earth. So we need that information. If we're going to publicly fund our universities and everybody else to get that information on us, we need it put in community trust where we can have access to it. And we need sunlight on school boards, on the districts, their negotiations, their contracts, who gets paid what, where, when, and how. And one way that this relates to your question is that it was a shock for me the first time that I ever sat in a district negotiation between the teachers union and the district. The way that they talked about our people and our children, the way that it was a business, I came away saying, listen, Black children are the new cotton in public education. That's where I said that for the first time, was watching like the ways in which they were counting up the numbers and counting up the heads, and it had very little to do with the outcomes of those kids or their families. And I thought to myself, if the public only knew, what the public employees and their employers negotiate behind closed doors and say about our people and say about the public. I think those meetings honestly should be public. They should be on cable access television. When the most major contracts are being negotiated about your children and your people, that should be on public access television. Everybody should watch and hear what's being said and what's being negotiated, who's getting what money. So when you talk about the roles of unions, they play a role in which I consider to be obstructing justice for our people, because their primary focus is on their members and the jobs and the careers of their members. And that's what they're made to do. But that doesn't mean that the district is any group of angels either. The districts also, they are business people. They are bean counters and whatnot. And they are not thinking through questions like what would be the best possible education that kids could get, whether it's with us or not. They're thinking, how can we keep seats keep heads and butts in seats and in classrooms? And how can we get that average daily allotment for our kids? And this is stuff the public just doesn't know. It's not demystified. The information is there. You don't see it. So I could answer the question just about unions as an obstacle, but then the entire thing's a business. They're one member of a business group that is processing our children like cattle. And the public doesn't have half the information that they need to hold them accountable for making good decisions for our kids.
Well, I feel like there's a couple viral moments in that one. Certainly, that cotton analogy certainly struck a chord. And obviously this is an audience question, so it's open to anybody else who wants to hop in. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts. Come off mute if you do. I will go to the next. Oh, Maurice.
Well, I'll just say that, from the growth and the benefit of collectivism and collective worker rights, philosophically, of course, I'm absolutely supportive of unions. And the dismantling of unions over the last 30 years has had, devastating impact. Still happening every day. There are a lot of large strikes happening now. And the assembly of a well-resourced collective body whose primary interest is their own stability within this cotton industry that was mentioned, has absolutely been a blockade in our own self-determination within this system. And I just wanted to quote the honorable ancestor John Einrich Clark, and he talks about powerful people cannot afford to educate the people that they oppress, because once you are truly educated, you will not ask for power, you will take it.
Ooh-wee. That's another viral mic drop moment. Shout out to the great ancestor, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Encourage people who are listening to this, if you have not heard of him, do a deep dive. Lots of good books on him out there, and there's a beautiful statue of him at Cornell University. Dr. John Henrik Clarke is the first PhD who did not even have a high school diploma in this country. Very fascinating man. Next question from the audience, as we're coming up on time. It says, can schools and communities unite to hold government and business accountable to serve people equitably?
Okay, you got to give that to me one more time. Read that one more time.
These are audience questions.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
Yeah, says, can schools and communities unite to hold the government and businesses accountable to serve the people equitably? It sounds like to me, it's like how do the people hold the people hold the people who have access to all the money and wealth accountable? At least that's what I heard in the question. I don't know how you heard it.
So, I'll take a quick stab at it just to say yes. I think that groups of people can come together, period. The construction of the question creates just those two groups, schools and communities. I think it's an interesting construction. Schools are part of the government, and schools are part of the problem. So, we talked about disparities between districts. We haven't talked about disparities within districts, and that's local control that's happening. So when schools and communities, when they try to get you to join their particular movement, sometimes it feels a little like co-opting, like, hey, don't look at us, look over at those other guys over there. Let's collect together. I get a little weirded out and suspicious about it because there's so many inequities within schools and their power that they are lording over right now, that maybe they're a partner and maybe they're not sometimes, right? I think schools and churches and activist groups and parents across lines of class and race and others can start coming together. Citizens can actually start working together, but the targets of their work together need to be those people who have power to make decisions within the systems that we're in. And that's within the schools, the school boards, the cities, the city council, the state. Have you ever talked to a congressman who's told you straight up, education ain't one of my issues? I have, right? So like when I think about government, I think of everybody from that local leadership all the way up to that person who said that to me. And yes, I think citizens should come together to hold them all accountable.
Good. Any other thoughts from the panelists on that audience question? Thanks for hopping in there, Chris. All right.
I think parents should absolutely be a demand for the kind of education that they want their children to receive, and they should be part of designing what that looks like. And I agree with what Chris said in terms of, should schools also be advocating for that? Well, they're part of the system. So I think, again, understanding the role that each level of the system plays is critical in any advocacy effort, any effort to create new accountability systems. You got to know what are the right questions to ask and who to ask them of. But absolutely, parents and families should be part of the demand for a high quality, equitable education for kids.
Absolutely. No arguments there. Final question to close us out. It's the audience question. It says, is there a national basic checklist for educational equity? And I'll add really quickly, if there isn't, what should be on it? So to reiterate, is there a national basic checklist for educational equity? Sounds like we should be creating one.
Well, I'll say first, there is no national nothing, right? Because as soon as you try to do any sort of national anything, you get people saying, states' rights, local control.
Right.
But is there science that says what all kids need to learn and to thrive and to grow? Absolutely. Does that change from kid to kid? No, the degree of it changes, but what kids need is what kids need, and it's affirmed by the science. So I think, yes, there is to some extent, but in terms of like whether that's provided and how, varies very, I think, greatly. But we need to start, I think, designing our systems based on the evidence, because I think right now there's far too much guesswork, needlessly. Like someone said previously, there is a science of learning that we know how children best learn how to read. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we providing that education to teachers in all of the teacher prep programs? Why aren't we basing that in all of our teacher professional development programs around literacy? Like, there really is no reason that our students should not have 100% literacy by the age of 8. It's
So
more of
true.
a will problem, not a science problem.
Right. Absolutely. Chris, final thoughts?
No, my final thought on that one, I just think that's a very smart people problem, meaning that that there probably are those checklists, but very smart people are arguing about them, or they're not all the same. Like if you were to look at what the National PTA suggests versus what the AFT and NEA suggest versus like the National Academy of Pediatrics and whatever, they each probably have a version of this. And there's so little collaborative action nationally about people sharing tables and coming together and really earning their alma maters, right? Like you've got all this fancy book learning, you got all this kind of like background. We got a nation full of fancy book learning, and these folks can't speak with one voice. When they start talking, it sounds like the Tower of Babel. So we got all these different organizations, we got all this. It becomes very hard for parents, for pedestrians, for the civilized folk on the ground to make sense of what the very smart people are all arguing about at top. So if anything comes out of this discussion, one of the things I would say as a final message to the very smart people is to keep it simple, stupid, to pull all your stuff together and help the public understand the deeper meanings behind the jargon that you're talking about. There are some states that the data that they put out to show how they're doing and how your kids are doing in school looks like a NASA project. You'll get a sheet of paper that's got all different size fonts and colors and gauges going on and different things happening or whatnot. That has to stop. That has to stop. If you can't be educators, if you can't educate the public on what you're doing. So take that as a challenge to, if your accountability systems are confusing to people, you've already failed. You've already failed, because your number one job one is to educate the public. That's what public education is. And you are failing if the public does not understand what you're doing.
Well, this has been a very good conversation. I appreciate each and every one of you for being with us today. Thanks to our student leader, Janet, who I think has to get back to class by now. Maurice, thank you so much. Appreciate all the work that you do and all the passion you bring. Laura and Christy, both of you, amazing. Appreciate all the expertise and all the work that you all bring into this space and in helping us have accountability at every level. And Chris, thank you again so much for your passion and all the work that you bring into this space as well. Again, you all, we have been hosting Seeking Common Ground conversations every Wednesday in October. Brightbeam is delighted to have another one next week on Wednesday, same place, same time. 90 minutes from 12 to 1:30. We invite each and every one of you to come back and join us for another Seeking Ground conversation next Wednesday at noon. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody. Bye.